This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories. Happy 4th of July, and welcome to just a fun video I wanted to do. It is, of course, an election year, and we'll be voting for the next president, so I wanted to look at some of the greatest and worst politicians to be elected in fiction. And with this, I said to split it into two parts. And today I'll be looking at just some of the worst ever, and I'll be looking at some of the best ever, probably sometime next week. Decided to do worst first because it's honestly just a lot easier to figure those out. And with this, the one rule I'm going by, well, the two rules I'm going by is they need to be elected by popular vote and not by a rigged election. And the second is that they just can't be a complete parody of a real politician. And that is just because I don't want to go super political with this and don't want to put someone who is just the representation of someone wanting to put them in. If the character is inspired by someone, especially for their presidency, or, the being like a mayor or something, I'll be fine with it as long as it's an original character. But if it's just supposed to be the political insert of a politician the writer didn't like, no matter if they were great or bad in the project that I'm talking about, I will not be considering them for this. So let's go and start up with number 8. And number 8, just going to be a more general entry. This is going to be all of our incompetent cartoon and, well, generally cartoon mayors where they're just people who are the sharpest tools in the shed. They're almost completely incompetent and are more or less joke characters. And just having them here, they're incompetent, but they can at least do their job. They're sometimes a little corrupt, but at least they don't have the huge mistakes that the next ones have. And since they're more supposed to be comedically funny, I'm putting them here because these other people aren't comedically, well, at least in a unironic sense, comedically bad, but they are still way worse than them, where some pretty bad things happen under their rule, but generally with these, if something bad happens, it's more or less as a joke. So it's just something I think I needed to mention, but I feel I can't rank any higher than this. At number 7, we have Mayor Norman Osborn, and this is from the Insomniac Spider-Man game. And with him, he doesn't seem to be the worst politician ever, but he allows some pretty bad stuff to happen under him. He is the sole reason for the Devil's Breath crisis, which is something he is 100% responsible for. But with other things, he gets to also have some pretty bad moments where he overuses his authority, hiring Sable, who goes and abuses the citizens of New York during a crisis. Yes, there is a crisis, and he sort of overuses his authority, but it is a little understandable. And he is just trying to make a cure to a deadly disease, but he causes all of the problems for the Spider-Man game and creates a lot of enemies, which puts all of New York in danger. And honestly, even though he does have his problems, it's at least sort of understandable, and all those mistakes are bad. They're at least not as bad as the rest of the people. Still is bad, but it's definitely not as bad as the mistakes are made by the others. So let's move on to our next one. And here we have Admiral Natasi Dala, head of the Galactic Alliance, and I'm only looking at her as head of the Galactic Alliance since in her other positions she seized power, but she was appointed to the head of the Galactic Alliance. Although it was by the recommendations of the Jedi, she still did take the office and would have had to been elected in. And the problem with her is that she just was way too selfish in her own political wants and needs, and this led to some nearly deadly stuff. She has many of the traits that someone later in this list would have, but she was using her personal grudge against the Jedi and creating a dangerous situation where something far more deadly could happen. And although I think it is at least understandable for how she was thinking, her leadership was so bad that it led to the Jedi leading a coup against her and overthrowing her, even though the Jedi are initially the ones who helped put her into office. And honestly, I think that she wasn't the worst, but she just had some really bad circumstances around her time, and after she is taken out, she kind of snaps and goes to take over the Empire. But at least with that, I'm not going to be counting that here. And I think that although she has done some horrible things in the past, she wasn't the worst leader of the Galactic Alliance, and she definitely could have been better, but I feel like things were kind of out of control, and she was stuck with a really bad situation that she didn't fully know about, and she let some of her personal grudges get in the way. But if Abeloth was presenting her attack under her, I think it would have dropped a bunch more. But since she was taken out of office before Abeloth's attacks, I think that it's at least understandable enough, and also I'm not really counting Abeloth since she did a bunch of manipulation to get herself elected in, and it wasn't a fair election, so she probably would have been the worst since she was just fully intending to create chaos, but since she used manipulation and took over a popular person's body, I will not be counting that. At number five, I'm putting a little more general term, but with two specific examples. We have our crime bosses who become mayor, and that's just mainly to help legitimize their authority and put them in a more unstoppable position. And with this, we have probably the two most famous examples being Oswald Cobblepot as mayor of Gotham and Wilson Fisk as mayor of New York. And while neither are completely terrible as politicians, they're just using this to help cover up their criminal empire and put them in a more legitimate position. And doesn't make them the worst, but they're completely abusing their power and using it for personal gain. And that makes them definitely worse than the others, but they are corrupt and they're corrupt, but they're not as corrupt or as incompetent as the rest of the people that I'll be talking about. So let's move on to number four. Here we have President Lex Luthor, and while Luthor did actually do a lot of good at the beginning of his career, especially helping kind of turn the US around, he is really bad towards the end. If you look at Batman, Superman, Public Enemies, he goes and starts to lose his mind, and instead of trying to save not only the US but the world from a deadly meteor strike, he wants it to happen to cleanse the world and uses all of his resources as president of the United States to let the world be destroyed. He is, of course, impeached and put on trial, but honestly, I'd say that him having a good run as president at the beginning helps him not drop any lower, but him sort of losing it all at the end definitely deserves him to be up here, and him wanting to have the almost entire world be destroyed to be repopulated by the survivors is honestly insane and definitely deserves for him to be ranked over here. At number 3, we have Emperor and Chancellor and Senator Palpatine. And I'm putting all three of his ranks here because no matter where he was not a good elected official, although he was hiding as both Senator and Chancellor. As Senator, he completely orchestrated the invasion of his home world just to get him elected to be Chancellor. As Chancellor, he created the situation for a galactic war and then committed genocide and used all of this to get him elected to become emperor. And as emperor, he committed countless atrocities, enforcing his will on all, but I'm able to count him as emperor since he was elected into that position. And just through that, Palpatine completely abused his power no matter what. He was committing treason as chancellor and as senator, and used all that to have people want to vote him into becoming emperor. He didn't manipulate the election, but he pushed circumstances to be where he would be almost certainly elected into becoming a supreme dictator of the galaxy. And the literal only reason that he's at number 3 is we have a just completely incompetent at number 2, and at number 1 we have his puppet. So let's go take a look at number 2 and at number 1. At number 2 we have Borst Falia, and he is one of the most incompetent politicians ever. And while that could be said about some other people on this list being incompetent, they didn't have a screw up as big as Failure. He had a mistake so bad it led to hundreds of trillions of deaths and one of the most, if not the most bloodiest wars in all of fiction. And that is his complete mishandling of the Yuuzhan Vong War. He had some pretty bad moments while he was senator and representative for his home of Bathory, but things get increasingly worse once he becomes chief of state, refusing to work with the Jedi and refusing to take the Yuuzhan Vong as a legitimate threat for a good amount of time, and trying his best to keep the Jedi out of military and government affairs. This led to the Yuuzhan Vong taking Coruscant, killing trillions there, and just to make things even worse, his incompetent leadership at the beginning caused for so many planets to die and an insanely high death toll. So high that it's honestly one of the highest death tolls to any war I could really know about. I feel like there's ones that have more, and I'm just not fans of those franchises, but of everything I know, I think it was approximately in like a 360 trillions, and most of that is on failure and his incompetent leadership. And yeah, honestly, even though Palpatine is way more corrupt and intentionally all this stuff, someone being completely incompetent and letting his politics rule him definitely deserves him to get higher than Palpatine, but at least he could do some good stuff, which I can't say about number 1. And at number 1, we have Count Dooku of Sereno, head of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and he's the absolute worst because he's a puppet. He literally did nothing to help his cause and was doing everything to benefit his master, fully knowing that the Republic was supposed to win the war. He sabotaged peace negotiations and did some pretty horrible atrocities. And if he was at least a person who was doing this for his own selfish goals, he would have dropped a few ranks behind at least Palpatine, maybe behind Lex Luthor, but here at least, him being a full puppet of Palpatine and doing everything for his master, and having no loyalty to his faction, and in fact, with it mostly being a bit of aliens, in Legends he was extremely xenophobic and hated all aliens, so he is made even worse there, but honestly, it is pretty interesting to see him here. If he was legitimately the person he claimed to be and was doing everything right, he would have been one of the best, but him being the puppet of Palpatine and faking his public persona and everything, he is just one of the worst. And although there might be someone who is worse than him that is another puppet, I don't really know of them. So for at least this ranking, I'm putting him as the worst since he is doing nothing to help his faction and doing everything to help the enemy faction, being a puppet of the leader of the enemy faction. So yeah, honestly, I think he is the worst, but I want to know what you think. Remember, this is all in good fun, and just think of some of these worst people when you're going to think about who you're voting for. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but this is just sort of a fun thing to do. Happy 4th of July once again, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.